Yo, 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 what up? We back. It's been a while. Life's, ooh, man. Yeah, I've been busy with Quidditch stuff. Trying to do better about being prepared for the podcast, so it takes, trying to do better about being prepared for the podcast so that I can do it faster as time goes on. But, gotta do this social media stuff, so, hold on a second here. Oh, snap. Man, it just feels like everybody's, like, out in the world lately. And I'm just constantly doing Quidditch shit. And I gotta finish this before 7? I think 7. Also need to open up dashboard. Couple things actually. Yo, how was your weekend? If you're in the chat, in the future or presently right now, tell me what was up. How was your weekend? Educate me. Yeah. I got a free sub to Barry on Deck. Make sure you go follow him on Twitch as well. And we'll get it popping here in a second. As soon as I get the stream manager pulled up. What it do, baby? And I need the link one. There we go. I need to draw something on the screen, which means I need the arrow. Guys, which social media account do you have that is popping off the most and it doesn't make sense to you? Because mine is my Instagram, TBH. Don't really understand why people dig my Instagram, but they do. And I don't even really post there as much anymore, man. I used to post like almost daily. Oh man, every day, it seems like there's a group of people who seek for us all to regress back to a horrible time. Anyway, tell me how your weekend went. What'd you do this weekend? What did you absolutely love? What did you absolutely hate? I gotta know. No, like I literally need to know. Please tell me. Did you do anything cool this weekend? Did you eat anything delicious, amazing? Horrible, perhaps. Those are always interesting stories. I feel like I remember more often when I eat things that taste bad because, quite frankly, I'm lucky enough to live in Houston, Texas. I usually don't eat food that tastes bad. Usually there's something else that goes wrong with it. Like, for instance, it takes too long to get the food. That happened. Oh, yeah. Bro, I was at a restaurant. I'm not going to do it the service of mentioning its name. But I was at a restaurant like 2 weeks ago, and they took I ordered a pizza from this place, and I showed up after they told me it was ready, and then I waited for like 30 minutes because they forgot about my order and didn't want to admit it. So that was fun for me personally, because I naturally, like, as a black person, unless there's like another black person in charge of stuff, just assume that is like in some way, shape, or form a slight in some way. I have no idea. I just know that I'm never going back to that place. And quite frankly, it's a giant leap for me to be like, oh man, like they're doing this because I'm black. But like you also in the back of your mind you can't ignore like the possibility of like, yeah, like this wouldn't happen to a white person. Like, and this is the weird thing too. Like, a person came into this pizza place, they didn't have a shirt on, They didn't even they didn't order online. They went up there and they kind of were not very kind to the person who was at the register, and they still got their food way before me, and they ordered after I did, and they had the same thing that I did. So it was massively disrespectful, bro. And the guy was just like, yo, sorry about that, man. I'm like, yeah, whatever, dude. Enjoy that money you got from me. It'll be the last money you ever get from me. Because, I don't have time for that kind of stuff in my life. Not this, and I get it. Fast food workers are working hard, and on top of that, getting swamped on a regular basis and not getting more money based on high quality, high inventory times that are happening. So they're making the same amount of money even if there's 50 people in the room, and even when there's one person in the room. But that doesn't take away the fact that it's a semi-hard job, and I totally understand that. But at the same time, if you just admitted that you forgot about my order, it probably would have been a lot better for them instead of me having to stand there and be be a person that was in a line and be the last person to get their shit that was in a line, and have multiple people who ordered the same type of pizza that I did. It was just a basic pepperoni pizza, nothing too crazy about it. And have multiple people who ordered the exact same thing, heard them say the exact same thing, and then saw them get the same thing before I did. You passed it to them. And I chalked a bunch of them up to oh man, maybe they ordered online, and then come to find out they didn't. They were just skipping me in line a bunch. So I take it personally because, one, I'm not going to fight a fast food employee. I'm not going to fight a fast food employee. And then on top of that, it's hard not to take offense to it from my perspective, right? Because I can't, there's no way for me to get out the fact that damn, that legitimately hurt me as a person. Anyway, that was a conversation about pizza from a fat guy. And that it is also a warm-up for me talking about the NBA Finals coming up here in a couple of seconds, because that's what we're here to do, folks. We're here to talk about the NBA Finals and everything that goes along with that. As soon as I get these tweets out, which I was supposed to be doing while I was talking to you, but that's not how life works. Man, come on, dude. You guys have so many notes that you kind of lose track of where important shit is at. Y'all. Because that's me right now. Before I tweet this out, should probably go live on the show. NBA Finals Game 1 and 2. Man. This is funny. Yeah. Oh, by the way, shout out Derek Fisher for finally getting fired from coaching the Sparks, because I heard nothing but horrible things for a really long time about him as a coach. But yeah, I found that interesting. NBA Finals hashtag. God damn. They didn't even do a little special cursive one. That's so wild. Usually the NBA is on top of that kind of stuff, but I guess not. Hashtag NBA playoffs. I guess not this year. I don't know what the deal with that would be, but podcast very much. Live stream. Nope. We're not doing hashtag live stream today. Oh, shit. But yeah, man, if you got any takes on the NBA Finals, I just finished rewatching Game 2 before I started this show, and I wanted to do it fresh. I was actually, see, this is the problem with the NBA Finals, bro. So most of the time when I'm watching regular season NBA basketball, I don't really have to deal too much with the fact that I don't have to deal too much, and I'll put this in fucking full screen. I don't have to deal too much with the fact that most human beings are not down to watch regular season basketball, and I am, because one, the sports that are quote unquote dominating in that moment don't really attract me all that much, and usually don't when it's all said and done. For instance, yesterday there was hockey playoffs on, and I heard the game was absolutely sick, and I also heard the Avalanche swept, but I never at any point was just yeah, Like, we should definitely watch that. Like, tonight, there's there's WNBA regular season basketball on. I will watch that as opposed to the hockey games that are on. And there's no offense to hockey. I just didn't grow up in a hockey culture, and got a little sound check in there. I just didn't grow up in a hockey culture, bro. I don't know what to tell you. You know what I mean? What can you possibly say? And I think even people who grew up in a hockey culture could tell you that that's not necessarily their number one cup of tea. You know what I mean? Let's see. Oh man, the Pivot Podcast had Cam Newton on. I'm sure that won't be highly controversial. A man who thinks very little of women. You know what? I take that back. Cam Newton does not think very little of women. He has an antiquated view of what women should be doing. And how women should be living their lives, which is always funny to me when somebody's like, oh man, you can't, you got to live your life a certain way because you have a penis and you have a vagina. And we came up with these roles that people fill like, centuries ago. And we've just decided we're never going to change those because it's easier for everybody to fit into like a certain job as opposed to, possibly, who knows, potentially having a different life based off of what they do merit-wise. Who would have thought? And there's my rant on gender roles, ladies and gentlemen. All right, yeah, we back. We're back in full force. You saw, we're back in full force, guys. We're clicking on all cylinders. Got the YouTube open to make sure I can check the comments there. Sorry if you already commented. I don't know if it keeps track of them or anything like that, but your boy did it. Your boy's got it open now. Let's see. Control C. Control V. Playbook. Ooh, wow. Almost brutalized my own fucking Twitter handle. Playbook on Twitter. Hope everybody's killing it today. Hope everybody's having a great day. Yesterday I listened to one of my favorite podcasts, and I'm not supposed okay. If you're a white person, you forget that I told you this. But one of my favorite podcasts is called The Read. They have a joke where, like, don't tell white people. But anyway, one of the hosts was basically like, I don't want to live anymore. And when I say basically, I mean he said that on the show. So it was a little tough. It was a little tough for me. He says he's stepping away and he's going to take care of himself and make sure that he's all right. And that's what I need. That's what I needed to hear. Because if that podcast never comes back and he gets to live a long, happy life, or even if he gets to live another week, I'll call it a win. Because he's fighting a battle. He's fighting a battle that I can't help him win. You know what I mean? So. Cool. All right, let's get it popping, shall we? Gonna go live on the podcast in 3. Going live on the podcast in 3, 2. What is up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody else in between? I'm Ashton Gene Lewis. This is the Broke Boy Sports Podcast. Yes, we are back from yet another Quidditch-induced hiatus. I think we skipped one episode last week because I had my first series as a head coach for Major League Quidditch versus the Austin Outlaws, and still pretty upset. about the results on that one. Went 0-3, but we got another series in 2 weeks where we play against New Orleans Curse. And of course, just like every single match we play this season, I'm expecting a dub, baby, until we get all the way to the Benefit Cup Championship, and gonna lock that one down. Shout out to everybody who hopped in on the stream. I saw some people on YouTube and on Twitch checking in. We are gonna talk about the NBA. We're gonna talk about the NBA Finals, Game 1 and Game 2 of the finals, and just kind of like chop it up about it, man, because one, I needed to get this out before Game 3 starts off tomorrow, so we don't have to talk about 3 games halfway through the NBA Finals or almost halfway through the NBA Finals by the time the next show comes around. And also these massive gaps in between games are pretty helpful for me, because I've been doing a terrible job of prioritizing the show, as you can imagine, as a person who has to work a job, do this podcast, research other sports, plus like run an entire team and do film study and all that kind of stuff like that. I spent a lot of time in front of this PC, just never with a camera and a ring light on my face doing stuff like that. But nonetheless, we got a couple of things to talk about, so we can talk about this off the jump. At minimum, we're getting to Game 5, right? So the Warriors got their first home stint of the NBA Finals. As you know, they get the first 2 home games, and then they're going to Boston for the next 2 as well. So they got a home road split, and if you believe the really old phrase about the playoffs or a series is not started until somebody takes a victory at home, it's good to know the NBA Finals officially started immediately. Instead of 2 games into the series or something like that. So Game 1 happens, and everybody's talked it to death, and it's pretty basic. The Celtics went out there and had one of their best shooting performances of the entire season versus the Golden State Warriors team that has been one of the best defenses in the NBA playoffs, and that's including compared to the Boston Celtics, who have been the best defensive team in the NBA playoffs so far. So they had that go on in Game 1. It was able to guide them to a victory, and it was actually a pretty close one when it was all said and done. The Warriors, I think something like Draymond Green said, yeah, man, we had them the entirety of the game, and then towards the end we faded, and when we faded, they were able to go out there and sneak away with the victory, which is exactly how you would expect a team to win on the road versus a championship, not just playoff tested, but a championship level tested team like the Golden State Warriors. You would expect a team that is like relatively young, like in comparison to like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum's actual physical age, the amount of time they spent on Earth. They are young, but in the spans of what they've done in the NBA, like I said before, this is the wildest thing. That Eastern Conference Finals that they went to is the 4th time they've been to the Eastern Conference Finals together as a duo. And of course, the team has changed a bit. Marcus Smart being Defensive Player of the Year, combine that with Al Horford with the massive resurgence of his career after having to take that 1 year off with the Oklahoma City Thunder so they can complete the tank job, which, by the way, doesn't look like it's really... You know what? I'm not going to get into that. The NBA draft is coming up here pretty soon, and hopefully I'll be able to have some more educated people on the show to talk about just the perspective on the draft. I've listened to so many podcasts about what people believe is going to go down for this year's draft and how they think it's going to shape out and what they think these guys are actually capable of. It's been interesting, to say the least. It definitely gives some vibe. Like, there's some guys who have like this mysterious aura around them and whatever. The air of mystery might be enough to pull you up a couple of spots in the draft, TBH. But anyway, we talk about Game 1. Jason Tatum goes out there. He has double-digit assists and over 20 points in the course of that game. That's pretty impressive, especially when you talk about this is their first time in the NBA Finals, and they're going up against a team that has been in some of the most iconic series of our time in terms of the NBA Finals, including a 3-1 loss or allowing a 3-1 comeback from LeBron James, which, in my opinion, cemented that he is one of the greatest basketball players, if not the greatest basketball player of all time. And in that game, this is the wildest thing, man. There was a 4th quarter that not only brought them back into it, but was complete domination. The Celtics scored 40 points in the 4th quarter of their game to be able to win by 12 points, right? Like that's pretty impressive. But the wildest part is the quarter before that, the Warriors scored 38, right? Like that was back and forth, because it seemed like that's what's been defining these first two matchups so far. The first half is a lot of back and forth affair. The first quarter is a lot of back and forth. You see a lot of high quality defense, and then the 3rd and the 4th quarter is when people just start unleashing. If somebody's going to go off in this series so far. In game one, it was of course it was the Celtics as a whole, because they had all but one of their starters. Robert Williams ended up with 8 points, and we can talk about Robert here in a second, because I felt like he did a great job in game two, and it just didn't pan out their way. But Robert Williams, who's playing on one leg, by the way, is out there, and he's the only starter that didn't finish in double digits. Derek White finished with 21 points, the sixth man off the bench, who is once again, not surprisingly enough, Derek White, who's been more consistent than Grant Williams usurped him, and of course Derek also played more than two of the starters for the Boston Celtics. He played 31 minutes. Marcus Smart played 29, and Robert Williams played 24. And honestly, man, these first two games, I'll say this about Marcus Smart, it doesn't feel like Marcus Smart's playing like a ton of time. And maybe it's because when he's out there on offense, when he's out there on offense, he does some absolutely absurd passing. But for the most part, man, it's really tough for me to sit there and be like, he's 100% like dominating like defensive player of the year. But I guess sometimes you get mixed up in terms of how you think Defensive Player of the Year presents itself on the court, because we've gone so long with Defensive Player of the Year being a de facto center award, right? So you're looking for like tangible things like blocking and shot modification, but like Marcus Smart just prevents people from like actually being able to get into any of their dribble moves. And then on top of that, that's the wild part about Marcus. He actually does a good job on offense. And so I guess I was expecting to see more. He scored 18 points in the first game. The second game is where it got a little hairy for everyone. But yeah, everybody in the second game really got shut down, because Marcus, he scored 2 points. No big deal. We'll get to that when we get to it, right? But nonetheless, everybody was lights out in game one for the Boston Celtics. And that's saying a lot, because Peyton Pritchard even got in on it a little bit and turned up on him a little bit, which, look, when Peyton Pritchard's tearing you up, we got to go back to the drawing board, because he looked terrible in game two. Anyway, game one goes by. A lot of the back and forth stuff happens between the Boston Celtics and the Golden State Warriors in game two, because obviously the Warriors feel like they need to impose their will upon the Golden State Warriors, because it seems like that's going to be a huge factor. Warriors score 107 points in game two of this series. Celtics get 88, and I'm going to be honest with you, man, that 88 is that was a tough 88. That was a hard 88 for them to go out there and get, baby. They had to fight and claw. And there was very few shots that were just straight up clean looks for them. But the few that they did get that were clean looks, that were clean looks, they actually knocked them down, which is important, because it would have been way worse if they just legitimately could not do anything throughout the course of this game. So I'll point this out. They shot 40% from three, and as a matter of fact, when I looked at it at halftime, they were shooting 52% from three. They were they finished 10 for 19 from three at half, and then they finished 15 to 37, which they went out there and they killed it, man. They did the damn thing. But I will point out, there was a lot of there was more defensive presence from, it wasn't just Draymond. Draymond was a big part of it, obviously, and Draymond kind of was the story coming out of game two when it was all said and done. But the fact of the matter is there was a lot of defensive pressure coming from everybody, right? So a lot of that stemmed from offensive rebounds by the Warriors, and then on top of that, the ability for the Warriors to cut off the bottom half of the paint. I'm not saying that I'm not talking about the top of the key. I'm basically saying that second hash mark down was basically non-existent as a scoring area for the Boston Celtics. When they did get in there, they couldn't get any good shots off. They didn't have any chemistry underneath, because obviously the Warriors mentally and visually have adjusted to the movement that the Celtics pull for their offense, and they did a really good job of generating turnovers, and the turnovers were the defining factor in this game, right? They had 18, the Celtics had 18 of them in total. They had 11 at halftime, and then they had 7 in the first quarter, and they had 7 for the rest of the second half. And 18 times 2, do the math, you know what I mean? That's 38 free points that are potentially on the board, and that's only if they're all layups, which they were not. They had some transition threes as well to go along with it, but for the most part, man, the defensive presence to cut off the paint was huge, and that was with guys still kind of getting getting some kind of separation when driving to the paint, but there was no continuity. So like basically they would get into the paint and there was no more passing, right? They couldn't get a second pass, and a lot of what the Warriors did when they got to the paint was having somebody on the backside of a play, because most of the time when they had somebody get into the paint, it was because they beat their defender man to man. Derek White did a great job in the second quarter and got cooked in the third, because most of the Celtics got cooked in the third quarter. That was the defining quarter in this entire game. But the big thing to take away from it was how dominant the Warriors were in terms of cutting off the twos, because the twos were also amplified by the fact that they got multiple offensive rebounds. Hold on a second. Let me see how many they got in total on this one. They got 6 offensive rebounds in this one, in comparison to, and that's weird because the Celtics got 6 offensive rebounds in this one as well. But yeah, they got 6 offensive rebounds, and it seemed like they were real timely when it was all said and done. And on top of that, it also felt like their offensive rebounds got turned into 3-pointers more often than not. So that applied pressure in multiple ways. Offensive rebounding, extra possessions for the Warriors, terrible idea at any given time. Why would you willingly give Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, who, by the way, still waiting for Klay to really kind of kick it into gear. He had a game 6, of course, versus the Mavericks. That was huge. That helped the Warriors. He had a game 6 versus the Grizzlies, which seems like months ago, which actually, was it months ago? It may have been months ago, but the game 6 that he had against the Warriors, everybody was on Twitter like, game 6 Klay is bad. Is it game 5? No, it's like game 6 Klay. Game 6 Klay was bad. That was huge for the Warriors overall. That was immediately following the situation where Draymond whooped that trick in Memphis, and he said, if we're going to whoop that trick, we're going to whoop that trick together. And then they eliminated the Warriors a game later in the Chase Center in San Francisco, which I feel like is one of the most cold-blooded things that anybody can do in sports. They celebrated your win with you, and then and then they kicked you out of the playoffs the next game. So I thought that was hilarious. Anyway, Klay Thompson, non-existent. Draymond Green still can't buy a bucket. Literally can't buy a bucket. He had so many instances in this game where it was either a turnover or a brick shot, and very few times was he actually effective in terms of like getting to the hoop. I'm assuming that has something to do with like the massive nerve injury that he had halfway through the season affecting his shot continuity. He had 9 points when it was all said and done, and Draymond Green's one of those guys that he's smart enough to understand that like when he's not on offensively, he got to figure out how to do it other ways. And luckily for Draymond Green, as a guy who's a quote-unquote undersized center, because at the end of the day, being tall is not a prerequisite for being center. Being good on offense and defense is a prerequisite for being a center. And Draymond Green, for whatever he lacks on offense, he is making up for it tenfold on defense. Not only defending on the perimeter, but on top of that, like making sure that he mentally affects their opponent. And I will point this out. They were playing the Warriors were playing a home game. There was a lot of calls that went their way that throughout the course of the game. There was a lot of, obviously, there was the weird immunity. There was the weird absolute immunity that Draymond Green had from getting his second technical to get him ejected out of the game, because he'd gotten to that point in his career. If you want to talk about full circle situations, when you've gotten to the point where like you get a technical foul for a dangerous play, and now you're basically immune because you are a key part of this series in the NBA Finals. You're subsequently immune because the league wants to protect you from being booted out of the game so that you can play more consistently, so that the Warriors have a legit chance of being able to get this win instead of getting swept in the first half or going 0-2 at home in the first part of this series. And you have to wonder, does that factor in to whether or not the Warriors were actually good versus the Celtics? Because there was a good chunk of time that first half of the game, it seemed like there was a lot of back and forth going on. I will point out that there were 2 buzzer beaters at the end of the first and the second quarter. Jordan Poole had one from like half court, and Steph Curry got one from like 5 feet away from the hash mark, and they knocked those down. That definitely is a huge factor when it's all said and done. But yeah, game 2 rolled around, man, and it was pretty interesting to see the defensive prowess that we saw from the Warriors throughout the course of this game, man. Jason Tatum had one of those games where he just completely not even completely shut down, because like, let's be for real, he led the team in scoring. He had 28 points when it was all said and done, but he definitely felt like his points came when the situation had almost been defined. He also was resided to shooting threes, because he went 6 for 9 for 3, and there was very few times where he was able to drive to the paint, and one that he was getting the fouls even though he was getting getting kind of bumped a little bit. And you know, if we're gonna call it that way, I'm totally cool with that. Just make sure that it's consistent. That's my number one thing when it comes to officiating overall. Just make it consistent. If we're gonna have bad officiating, everybody have bad officiating. And I'm not saying that a lot of the stuff that happened to Jason Tatum should have been called a foul, but I'm just saying if there's gonna be good officiating, make sure it's good for both teams. If there's gonna be bad, make sure it's bad for everybody, right? And that's the most important thing. And it felt like, of course, when the officiating is a little lopsided, you can't help but feel like that affected the outcome of the game. But when you see the team get blown out because of a 38, what was it in the fourth quarter? It was 35-14 in terms of points, right? So the first quarter, the Warriors had a bunch of the really big-time splashy type plays, and of course they were at home, so it magnified the significance of a lot of the shots that they took, right? So they scored 52 points in the first half, and then the Celtics scored 50. And it looked like it was an even back and forth affair. Yes, the Warriors' buckets looked like they were a lot easier for them to obtain because it was centered around passing. And then the Boston Celtics, they seemed to be like really segmented. Like it was like, it's my turn to drive the basketball. It's my turn to kick it out. And that's what affected their ability later on and in the first half as well to get any possession that would go beyond 3 passes or like even 2 passes in certain situations, right? It felt like their ISO ball was able to go out there and win them the first quarter, but in the long run, that's heavily dependent upon people making shots and contested shots. And later on in the game, you can watch, there was like a cut up of every possession or every time Al Horford touched the ball. Every time he touched the ball, he was immediately mobbed by like either the defender that he was on or he would go down into the paint and there'd be 2 people on Al Horford of all people to affect not only his ability to score but his passing lane. There was even one video. By the way, shout out Steph Curry. He killed it today. He killed it yesterday defensively. We saw that, and I think a lot of people reside on the same thing that we've been told for a really long time about Steph Curry in terms of his defensive effort. But I think we saw a good example of point guard is the most difficult position to defend in the NBA, and because basically your point guard is typically one of your most athletic, if not the most athletic person on the floor. Talk about Russell Westbrook, Ja Morant being examples of it, and typically that affects Steph Curry, of course. And not saying that Steph Curry's not athletic, but like Steph Curry has heavy responsibility when it comes to the way that the Warriors used to run their offense and still do run their offense now. Steph doesn't do a ton of obstacle course running, which is what I used to call it, because he used to run like he was, it basically was like he was running through revolving doors, and he would pop up on the other side of the revolving doors and be wide open. And the revolving doors were his teammates setting screens. He just doesn't do that as much anymore because they realize he doesn't need what's open for Steph Curry now is not the same thing that used to be open for Steph Curry later. Also, he's gotten better at manipulating defensive assignments and stuff like that. So he's done a lot better job of that overall. And so they don't need 17 screens for him to be able to get wide open, right? He's also got other people that he can depend upon to knock down shots. Now, something that it used to be Klay Thompson and Steph Curry kind of, and Draymond Green would get in the mix. Now it's like Andrew Wiggins can knock down shots when he needs to. Klay Thompson may not necessarily be the guy that you depend upon, but he can shoot basketballs as well. You got Steph Curry, you got Jordan Poole appearing as well. They even had Gary Payton II get in on some of the 3-point shooting in game number 2. But overall, man, I'm not like super duper concerned with the Celtics, mainly because you look at the way that this game finished, it was defined solely by one quarter. And how often can you bank on that? Because this is the thing too. A lot of people pick the Warriors to go out here and win this entire thing, and I don't believe that. I think the Celtics are going to win the series. I don't know if it's 6 or 7 games, but it's looking more like 7, right? But I would say Celtics in 6 when it's all said and done. But I believe the Celtics are a better team, and they've shown the ability to wear down their opponent. Whereas the Warriors, they're not the team. They're not the Warriors team that everybody remembers from like a couple of years ago. And as usual, like the general public perspective of sports is like always like a couple of years behind and stuff like that. And I get it. They've had a lot of seasons in the past couple of years defined heavily by injuries to actual legitimate superstars, right? That's important to point out that this is Klay Thompson coming back after essentially not being able to play NBA basketball for 2 years, right? The last game that Klay Thompson played up until this season was the final game in Oracle Arena versus the Toronto Raptors in the NBA Finals, right? That seems like an eternity ago. And Kawhi Leonard's on a new team and gotten a new contract since then, right? And Kyle Lowry's on a different team and has a new contract with the Miami Heat. So that's the kind of thing that's defining this whole situation. But I personally believe in the long run of the abilities of the Celtics. I will point out, like, the defensive effort that we saw overall was still there. They were just knocking down, like, they just hit threes, right? Like, you look at the third quarter, Steph got some open threes. Derek White and everybody else who got a chance to go out there and play, I felt like did a decent job of defending, right? Like, that was another thing too. A lot of what the Warriors did was from the perimeter overall. I didn't feel like there was a ton of, like, free runs to the hoop because they got completely misaligned defensively. There were some times where guards would beat another guard immediately off the dribble and get into the paint. The center rotates over, and then their center rotates from the dunker spot, and they finish those. That wasn't a ton of those, though. You look at the three-point percentage when it was all said and done. Just in the third quarter, they made 7 threes, right? Which is as many as Jason Tatum made throughout the course of the game. They shot 58% from three, and that's massive. That's 21 out of the 38 points that they scored in the 21 out of the 34 points that they scored in the third quarter. Or 35 points they scored in the third quarter. But that was massive for them, obviously, because that's a pace that the Celtics couldn't match unless they too were going to have a spectacular day. But I look at that first half and I think about, man, the Warriors went out there and it felt like, and it looked like they were bodying the Celtics in the paint. And the Celtics still basically lost the first and the second quarter by 1 point when it was all said and done. And then an absolutely ridiculous third quarter, which has been, of course, a calling card for the Warriors for a really long period of time. It has been a calling card later on in these playoffs, not necessarily throughout the course of the regular season or anything like that. And then the fourth quarter rolls around, and of course it's out of hand, and they got a lot of the backups in there. Steve Kerr is trying to get Klay Thompson going again, right? Everybody's talking about that. He's got him still in the game in the fourth quarter when the game is heavily decided already. And on top of that, he's got Klay Thompson out there to make sure that, Jason Tatum is still relatively contained. The dude had 28 points in this game, right? Like, they're trying to make sure that they don't have like a sudden explosion because they saw that they did that to the Mavericks to force their starters back into the game, right? Robert Williams, for a guy who was hurt, he had the best plus minus out of all the people who played in this game. He only played 14 minutes when it was all said and done, but I felt like when he was out there, he did a great job of manipulating a lot of the shots. He was one of the better defenders overall. Daniel Theis, what he lacks on offense is what really prevents him from being a threat. But then we're looking at Robert Williams, and Robert Williams isn't much of an offensive threat anymore. So it's like, you got Daniel Theis out there. He played more minutes than Robert Williams, by the way. But he just wasn't as effective in terms of like being a center out there. And it's one less person that the Warriors have to defend, right? It's one less person that the Warriors have to dedicate a ton of resources to stop it. And not to say they got to dedicate resources to stopping Robert Williams, but it's Robert's proven to be one of the best rebounders in these playoffs so far when it was all said and done. And that's saying a lot because he only had 2 in this game, right? But he's consistently proven to be a threat that has to be addressed because he's not only manipulating what look like easy layups, because he had as many blocks as he had rebounds in this game, right? And those blocks were at like key moments in the first half of the game. And he got rolled up off of a Marcus Smart drive to the hoop, and it looked like he was going to be done for sure. And I don't know how he did it, man, but he got up and he kept playing. But he had like a -6 when it was all said and done. He just couldn't play the entire game, or he couldn't play all the minutes that the Celtics would want him to do. And I think that factors in a ton into how you perceive what the Celtics were capable of doing, what the Celtics were able to do. I'd also like to point out and this goes along with the officiating, right? Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum both had 2 fouls in the first quarter. And that affects the way that they play defense. There's no question about that whatsoever. But Game 3 should be a ton of fun, man. And I'm about to wrap this one up. We've been going for 40 minutes on the stream, and I think this podcast is like, 25 minutes. Yeah, we'll wrap this up. When we come back on Friday, we'll do one that involves all the sports and all the segments and all that kind of stuff like that. But, sorry, don't know what's happening throat-wise there. Anyway, they got that going for them, right? They're out there, they're cooking a little bit. And in Game 3, I feel like there's going to be some kind of response that comes out of this one because the barrage of threes is not something that has proven to be sustainable for the Warriors throughout the course of these playoffs so far. They've found, and this is the best part about the Warriors, they found ways to get other buckets. They found other people to get them buckets. Like we talked about Jordan Poole being able to get people buckets. We talked about Gary Payton II actually coming back from his fractured elbow and the kind of regular season he was having in terms of playing like top tier elite level defense. Combine that with Klay Thompson, who is relatively the same size as Jason Tatum, and went out there and showed in Game 1 how he can impact the game. Of course, you want to see Jason Tatum have a takeover type moment versus the Warriors. Do I believe that that's going to happen? No, because I believe that the Celtics are still wholeheartedly all in on the defensive, on the team effort that they've been putting in, because I feel like the team effort is what's carried them this way and carried them this far, and to abandon it in the NBA Finals, especially after all we've talked about with Ime Udoka being the guy who's finally convinced Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum to work together instead of working against each other. Not necessarily working against each other, but to work together as opposed to working apart, which subsequently worked them against each other in some of their key moments throughout the course of the season. Finally seeing the emergence of Robert Williams, and that's going to hit hard. Got to see Al Horford step it up a little bit. Got to see Marcus Smart step it up a lot, especially considering they have the potential to win this series. There's no question about that whatsoever. I think there were some people coming into this series, and maybe they were casuals, you would say, but that didn't believe that the Celtics had the ability to beat the Warriors, and I found that hilarious because the Warriors have been the more dominant team in the playoffs the Celtics have been the more dominant team in the playoffs than the Warriors. The Celtics beat far tougher teams to get to the NBA Finals and beat them in pretty impressive fashion in the course of like long series when it was all said and done. Steph Curry had a couple of huge moments, had a couple of huge games, and that pans out. And the best thing about Steph is, Steph has always been, quote unquote, the underdog in a lot of these situations. And so a lot of what his game is not relying on one singular skill, right? A lot of people talk about, and they discredit Giannis's ability because of the simplicity of his game, even though what you call simplicity is basically like take the ball to the basket, put ball in basket, which is what everybody else is doing, right? Just put the ball in the basket more than other people are putting it in the basket, which is what Giannis does. But Steph is able to operate within the space of an offense that makes other people a threat, that takes the pressure off everyone to go out there and be successful as individuals, which versus the Celtics, it felt like because of the way the Warriors played defense, they got separated and segmented from each other, and it definitely affected their ability to be successful. So with that being said, I'm done. I'm going to pack it up here. I got a meeting to get to a little bit, and also I need to go work out before that meeting. So shout out to everybody who checks out this podcast. Tell me what you think on Twitter, FB_playbook. Hit me up on Instagram at TheAshtonForever. Hit me up on TikTok at TheAshtonForever as well. Tell me what you think about the NBA playoffs. Tell me your predictions. I'm going Celtics in 6. Celtics in 6, which means they got a lot of work to do when they play in Boston tomorrow at 7 p.m. Today, by the way, I have to be responsible. Today's Tuesday, June 7th, and you're listening to the Broke Boys Sports Podcast. Go home, Roger.